What does it mean to be eating disorder recovered? And is eating disorder recovery, a full-fledged, lasting eating disorder recovery, actually possible for everyone? While I believe that the answer to these things is yes, a full and lasting recovery is possible for everyone, I do also believe that each individual is unique and that recovery might look very different from one person to the next. So, for some people that have a long lasting, very intense eating disorder, so for say 20, 30 years of an eating disorder with very intense behaviors, their recovered might look very different from somebody that has just gotten an eating disorder, started those behaviors, maybe is very young. Their eating disorder was caught very quickly, and they received very rigorous, intense interventions, such as an eating disorder recovery center. Both of those individuals are going to have a different experience when it comes to eating disorder recovery and what it means to be recovered. Now, while in a perfect world, eating disorder recovered might mean I'm now eating intuitively, I have hunger and fullness cues, I don't spend much of my day at all thinking about hunger and foods, I can plan meals without anxiety, and so on and so forth. That might not be what peaceful is for everyone that is in eating disorder recovery. For some people with very extreme, long duration eating disorders, eating disorder recovered might mean that they always follow an eating disorder recovered mechanical eating plan. If you're curious to learn more about what an eating disorder recovery meal plan looks like, definitely check out the link above and you can find my video on eating disorder recovery meal plans. While this might not be the ideal for everyone, because maybe people don't want to be so hinged into a meal plan, this might feel like safety for many individuals that have a long-standing eating disorder recovery. I also want to mention that eating disorder recovered doesn't mean that we never have an eating disorder behavior again. In fact, I think that's kind of toxic thinking. So, for example, we, as a person that is an eating disorder recovered, may occasionally have a relapse and still live well within the parameters of eating disorder recovery. So, for example, they might be going strong with their eating disorder recovery for 5, 6 years, and they may engage in a purge, such as self-induced vomiting. Now, that doesn't mean that the person is now back in full-fledged eating disorder zone. That just means that they have had a relapse, and it is important to pull back in the tools that they used during their initial stages of eating disorder recovery to kind of fine-tune their coping tools and avoid potentially purging in the future. I actually encourage people to really shift that word even from relapse or being back in an eating disorder world to just relearning. They're relearning, they've maybe encountered a new challenging or stressful situation and they've engaged in that behavior, but they still might be in a full-fledged eating disorder recovery. So it means that we never engage in another eating disorder behavior or thought again. So I think that's really important to distinguish is that black and white thinking is what gets us into an eating disorder in the first place. So we really want to avoid that in eating disorder recovery. As somebody that struggled with an eating disorder for 15 years, I can tell you that for me, being eating disorder recovered doesn't mean that I never have an eating disorder thought again. In fact, I probably have an eating disorder thought every single day. But hear me out, the noise is much, much different. So I like to compare it to something like training a small dog. So if you get like a little dog and you're thinking about like a yappy dog that's constantly nipping at your feet, barking really loudly, annoying the neighbors, annoying you, you can't think, it's eating all of your shoes, all those things. Like it's very obnoxious, it's very invasive. And then you take steps to train the dog, right? So you take the steps to train the dog, and the dog learns we don't eat shoes and we don't yap really loudly all the time. And soon the dog is just a peaceful companion. Now, I know it's kind of fucked up to think of your eating disorder voice as a peaceful companion, but that's actually kind of how I see my eating disorder voice. It's kind of like looking at pictures on a wall, or like I said, that yappy dog, where it's there. You know it's there, but it's very non-threatening. I am no longer feeling a compulsion to restrict my food, to purge, to throw food away so it's out of the house. I might have the thought to do that, like, hey, Sheena, it would be really great if you just ate all of the ice creams in the ice cream box so we don't have them tomorrow. Or you better throw away those last um, 3 bites of macaroni and cheese and make sure it hits the garbage so you can't eat it. I might have that thought, but as fucked up as it is, it's kind of comical for me now. And I think that is really kind of the power in recovery is we can have the thought, we can observe the thought, but we have the tools to say, that thought is not rational and it is not something that I'm going to act on and engage in. And so that is really the power of eating disorder recovered. So food no longer controls my life. The desire to shrink my body no longer plagues every thought and decision that I make. I have normal, healthy relationships with other humans. I'm able to have romantic relationships. I'm able to engage in social dining. And food doesn't really take up much space in my brain throughout the day. And to me, that is what recovered means. But it doesn't mean that I never have a day where I have the urge to restrict and that years go by and that I never maybe engage in an eating disorder behavior. I certainly do at times, but it's very, very few and far between, and it's very not invasive. So I think that's really important to consider in when we're thinking about eating disorder recovered is how deep is the noise in our mind? How pervasive is it in our lives? So when we're thinking about a situation like mine, where I am able to eat intuitively and I am able to keep that food noise down and maybe engage more in social situations around dining, it doesn't mean it's any better than the person that had a long-standing eating disorder and needs to follow a mechanical eating plan. That person might be free from the majority of their eating disorder thoughts as long as they're engaging in that meal plan. And that might be what their recovered means. So it can look very, very different from person to person. And I want to acknowledge that we know as professionals that eating disorders are extraordinarily competitive. And so when we're thinking about eating disordered recovered, it's really important to know that your journey might look different to recovery and being recovered than somebody else's journey. But that does not mean that you are less recovered than that person. It just means that your eating disorder has had a different story alongside of it, and that is okay.